Welcome to the Call to Act podcast.
Oh yeah, baby.
What's up, guys? Welcome into the Call to Act podcast. I'm your host, Donovan Jones. I want to say we're closing in on like a month since the last episode. I think this is when this one comes out. It'll have been 4 weeks since the last episode, which was a great conversation with Paris Kariz. So shout out to Paris for coming on. It was a lot of fun to get to talk to him about just Jesus, music, shoes. You know, I love Jordan, so to get to talk to him about shoes and things like that, basketball, it was a great conversation. So if you have not checked that out yet, I want to encourage you to go tap into that episode. It was a very fun conversation, but this has been the longest span without an episode since the inception of Call to Act. Call to Act, I want to say now it's like 4 years and 8 months that the Lord has allowed me to do this podcast. And a lot's happened over the last couple of weeks, which is why I have not come out with an episode. And like I said, for so long, for 4 years, it was every single week. And then I got to a point a little while back where I was doing every other week. So it was like 2 episodes a month instead of 4. And then beginning of this year, it didn't feel right to space out the episodes when I was going through the series of Is Jesus Real? And so we switched back to that every week format. And I'll be honest with you guys, over the last couple of weeks, I've been fighting some demons. And I think that the closer that you get to the thing that you've been praying for or the thing that you've been striving for, the harder the enemy is going to try to attack you. I read in Levi Lusko's book, I believe it is, I Declare War, where he says the closer that you get to God, the bigger the target gets on your back. And so I've just been facing some demons. And I've been open with you guys over the last couple of years when I've been struggling, when I've gone through different trials, gone through different discouragements and things like that. But I've been really just kind of contemplating a lot of things over the last couple of weeks. Inside this year, 2026, there's been so many changes. Like my kids started school. You know, we talked about that in the past of last semester. Starting in January, they started school, and we started going to a different church, and God's been doing some things there. And actually, that's one of the things that I want to talk to you guys about, because I really think that the message that is going to be kind of pulled out of this whole talk right now is just perspective. Just to change perspective. And what I want to do is I just want to read a couple of verses with you guys, because I have some pretty exciting news that I want to share with y'all towards the end of the episode. And I don't know how long this episode is going to be, but basically I want to share with you guys a couple weeks ago. I got to go to a men's conference in Nashville. And you guys know, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, my love for the way that Jonathan Pokluda teaches the scripture. I love listening to him talk about the things of God. It builds my faith. It challenges me. It stretches me. It just the wisdom that God has given him, and the way that he's able to teach it. It's a way that I'm able to comprehend and understand and grow from. And so he's been big for me, spiritually speaking, somebody to listen to. Another guy is Joby Martin. Really more recently for him. And then there's this guy named Robbie Gallaty, who's a pastor, who was actually a pastor here in the Chattanooga area for a while. And now he's at a church, I think just outside of Nashville, I want to say. I can't remember exactly where his church is, but he hosted this event in Nashville, a men's conference, and he had JP and Joby Martin there. And so I got the opportunity to go to that. And that's where I got this hat. If you're watching this and you're like, what's the whole blame Jesus thing about? There's a country music singer, which, you know, country's not my thing, but they had a dude there named Drew Parker, and he had a song come out with Stephen Curtis Chapman called Blame Jesus. And basically the whole story behind the song is, the way that he's living his life now. It doesn't have anything to do with himself. It's Jesus working through him. So if you see anything good in his life, blame it on Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Like put all the blame on Jesus, put all the blame on what Jesus did on the cross to redeem him. That's the reason that he's able to do the things that he's doing. It's because of Jesus. And that's one of the verses that we're going to read today, because it just kind of coincides with the news that I'm going to share with y'all for a minute. But basically what I wanted to do is kind of share perspective. I just think it's going to come through in just everything that we're looking at, the 2 passages of scripture that we're going to read. And then I'm going to share some of the notes that I took from the men's conference, mostly from JP. And then I wanted to read a couple of the notes that I took from Drew Parker, because they did something pretty cool with him that I'll talk about in a minute. But basically where I want to start this is like maybe you're going through something right now. Okay. And you've heard me say something similar to this before. What I am learning as I'm going through this walk is when you're walking with Jesus, there's a lot of times in this life that you're walking through pure hell. There's a lot of times because we're essentially, when you're choosing to walk with Jesus, you're on enemy territory constantly. The enemy doesn't have to come after you if you're living for this world, right? And one thing that you're going to see in this life is it's easier to succumb to sin than it is to submit to the lordship of God. And that's kind of the wrestle, the tension that you're going to find in your life. Am I going to succumb to sin? Am I going to say, you know what, this path is harder than I thought it would be? I don't remember my pastor ever talking about this following Jesus thing being so difficult. So you know what? I'm a Christian. I'm saved. All those things. It's good and fine, but I don't think I want to go deeper because I'm drowning right now. You know, the Psalms talks about deep calls to deep, and not a lot of Christians are willing to go through that deep, to kind of flounder. That's because that's where your faith is tested. That's why James can write, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you face trials of various kind, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." Or I like the way that the New King James words it, where it says produces patience, because patience is so key in the Christian life. You look at all the various stories and just examples of this in the Old Testament, where you got guys like Joseph, you got guys like David, you got the man of faith Abraham, who their life was marked by patience, trusting that God's true plan for their life was better than the one that they could create for themselves. And so maybe you're walking through a difficult time right now, and this episode has found you, and you're like, man, maybe I need something of that what he's talking about right now. I need a fresh perspective shift in my life. So my kids started school earlier this week, and the other night my daughter wanted to go, as she's starting middle school, which is just unreal. She wanted to go and decorate her locker. And so while I was at work, Kelly took her to buy, things for her locker to kind of, dress it up and all that kind of stuff. And so I got home from work, we packed the car up, we headed up to the school. And as we were driving up to the school, it just started pouring rain. I mean, you could barely see the road. Everybody's slowing down. Everybody puts their flashers on, and everybody's like trying to be all careful and stuff. And I'm like squinting, trying to see the road. I mean, it just looked like, sheets of rain just pouring down. And I remember Kelly, she goes, man, it's white. Like, she's like, it's raining so hard. All you can see is just white. And I look back at the kids, and Foster is looking out his window. Foster is our 5-year-old, he is the most joy-filled person that I've ever been around. And I pray over him all the time that God allows him to just be able to keep that joy that he has, because he's always laughing. He's always got a smile on his face. And I look back there at him as we're driving in the pouring rain, and he's looking out his window up at the sky. And me and my wife are talking about, how it's raining and we can't see anything. And Foster, as he's looking out the window up to the sky, he goes, "Hey, I can see the sun." Right? And that really spoke to me, because there's always that perspective that we can choose to have of, yeah, maybe you might be in a storm right now that's raining so hard that all you can see around you is just these white sheets of rain. But the sun, the truth that the sun is still there, doesn't change. And the way that God can use just a little, 5-year-old to be like, oh, wow, the sun was there the whole time, even though I didn't see it in the midst of the storm. It didn't change what's true. And so we've talked about this before, this truth of, we don't go based off of what we feel. We don't go off of emotions. We live our life and we stand on this foundation of what we know to be true. And Satan right now has really been, over these last couple of weeks, shaking my foundation when it comes to, I'll just be honest with you guys, my family. Both my parents, who I was raised in a Christian home, they're far from God in this moment. And both of my parents are kind of going down this road that I think if you're someone who looked at them, because my dad, growing up, I don't think I shared this before on here, but my dad thought he was supposed to be a pastor. He was a youth pastor for a little while. I remember before my parents got a divorce, when I was in 6th grade, I remember he was a youth pastor. And so he was someone that obviously if you were in his youth group for any extended period of time, like you would kind of look up to him and be like, oh yeah, that was that dude. Even if you saw him years later, like that's that dude that was, that taught me in my youth group, that kind of thing. And, I know that there's guys that, my dad coached my team when I was growing up until 6th grade. And there's still people to this day that were around my age that still call him coach. You know what I'm saying? So like in the life of a kid, there's even if it's for a short period of time, if an adult does any kind of thing like coaching or Sunday school or any of those kind of things, like in the mind of a child, it's a lot longer than maybe it actually was. Like you could be doing something for a kid for 6 months, and in their mind, you were around their whole childhood. You know what I mean? Like that can be very easily something that a child picks up. And so if it was someone who was in my dad's youth group while he was teaching at that time, and they look at him as like, oh, that was someone who helped me in my faith. And then now they look at him, they're like, what, kind of what's going on? It's like shaking my foundation. And so I think ultimately, and I don't want to get too, I'm not trying to like air out a bunch of dirty laundry or anything like that, but there's just been a lot of things going on in the life of both of my parents that really is kind of, Satan's used to kind of shake me a little bit as well. And I think it's just kind of reaffirmed to me, like you can't place your faith. You can't borrow someone else's faith. Like your faith has to be genuine for itself. But I just think that when you have people in your life that you kind of look to for like encouragement when it comes to your faith, and they're going in a completely different direction, it can kind of rock you a little bit, right? And so with all these things that have been happening in my life, the changes that we've seen over this last year, just mixed with regular spiritual warfare, like Satan's really been coming at me personally lately. And that's why I think this whole topic of perspective is one that I'm living out right now, because when you're in the midst of the storm, you can be like Foster and like, I can still see the sun, because that's a constant, right? Same way with God. God's always there. God never promises us that you're not going to face trials and tribulations and storms. His own brother says, count it all joy in the midst. And so I told you guys that I only wanted to read 2 verses, but I'm studying James right now, and I just want to read this other one really quickly, because Romans 5:8 says that God demonstrates his love towards us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We talked about that ad nauseum over the last couple of months, but I think the reason that the Lord had really been playing that verse in my mind over and over and over again is because when I started studying James a couple of weeks ago, it really unlocked something for me that I never realized before. James chapter 1, verse 12. So to this point, James really is talking about trials. And in the midst of that, it builds patience. It builds what he says in verse number 4. It allows you to be made perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And he goes into, if any of you lacks wisdom, you need to ask God for it. God's going to give you wisdom, but do not ask with any kind of doubting. The person that doubts is like someone that's tossed by the sea to and fro. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. He should not expect that he's going to receive anything, right? So then we get to verse number 12, and it says, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. I mean, that's a bar just in and of itself. Blessed, or other translations say happy. Happy is the man who remains steadfast under trial. So in the midst of the storms, you have the option to choose joy. You have the option to choose happiness over succumbing to just, oh, woe is me. My life is terrible. I'm going through these different trials. Why does God hate me? Because this is the attitude that we can so easily take. He says, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. So I'm going to read the first couple words here in this verse again. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life. One commentary that I read talking about this verse says that we demonstrate our love for God by resisting temptation. 2 Timothy 1:7, God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. Self-control is simply just the ability to say no to your flesh. And so this verse tells us that blessed is the man who says no to his flesh, that remains steadfast under trial, that remains steady, that remains patient, that endures during trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life. So God demonstrated his love towards us by sending Jesus. So how do we demonstrate our love toward God? We resist temptation. We resist the things that our flesh desires. We resist the things of this world and say, God, I trust that you are going to fill me more than the things of this world. That's why Ephesians says, do not be drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but instead be filled with the Spirit. Essentially what that is telling us is, if you are of the world, you are going to seek wine. You are going to seek whatever, fill in the blank with what you think is going to fill that God-sized hole in your heart. But it says that the believer fills himself with the Spirit. And that's not a one-time thing. We've talked about this in the past before, right? Where it's this continual, Father, fill me with your Holy Spirit. Right? I recognize that I need a constant refilling of your Spirit, because as I am in this fallen state, I'm not perfect. So I need your Spirit to fill me constantly, renewing my mind, not conforming to the things of this world, but being transformed by the renewing of my mind. It's all about perspective. Okay. And so I'm going to read a couple notes, a couple of things that JP talked about, which was it was an unbelievable, sermon that he gave, unbelievable talk. One thing that he said was, mind your mouth. He says our words matter way more than we realize. The things that we say determine our direction in life, because it demonstrates what is in your heart. And then he followed up with something that I've never heard before, but it makes complete sense, where he says, either angels or demons rejoice at every word we speak. I'm going to say that again. Think about this. Either angels or demons rejoice at every word you speak. Satan wants you to believe sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. We have lost the value of our words. We are speaking beings. God spoke. When you read Genesis, it says that he spoke, and what he spoke, that came to be. We are completely unique than anything else that God created, and in many different ways. But one is the ability that we are speaking beings. Levi Lusko says, and I declare war, that the future version of you is just an exaggerated version of you right now. So what kind of life, as Proverbs 18 tells us, the power of life and death is in the tongue. And this is, it's just beautiful. The power of life and death is in the tongue. So what does that mean? Life is Jesus, because Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, John 14:6. What is death? Death is eternal separation from God. But for the believer, you can never be separated from God, because Jesus says, no one can pluck you from my Father's hand. Okay. So what does that mean? The power of life and death is in the tongue. That means you can either speak life over yourself by speaking words of Jesus, words of truth over yourself and others, or you could speak death. If you cannot be eternally separated from God because you are a believer in Jesus Christ, death just simply means fracture, separated. So you can fracture your relationship or someone else's relationship with God by the way that you choose to use your words. That's why demons rejoice if you speak death over people, because you, with the power of the tongue that God has given you, you can speak death over someone in such a way, in terms of speaking negativity over people, speaking things that are not Christ-centered, and you can push somebody away from God. You can fracture their relationship with God. And you can say, well, that's not on me, right? Scripture clearly tells us that we are to build each other up. Ephesians is all about things that need to be going on inside the church in terms of what the church should look like. Same with Titus. And as you read those letters that Paul was writing with the Holy Spirit inspiring him the things to say, he talks about unity. We're to maintain unity within the bond of peace, he says. And so like our words have that ability to speak life over people and ourselves, or death. And so since we are not going to ever die in terms of being eternally separated from God, we can fracture, we can separate ourselves from God in this life by the way that we turn our back to him and go away from him, right? Does not mean we lose our salvation, but what it does mean is that you're missing out on what God can do through you in your life now that is beneficial to the kingdom. You can miss out on things that God wants to do through you, because Ephesians 2:10 says that God has a good work created beforehand that you should walk in. It's like that you have to, but that you should walk in. And so I wanted to share a second thing that JP talked about, where he said, unleash your faith. And he said something that really kind of convicted me and kind of resonated with me, where he says, we all want to say that we have a faith, but we don't want to go through the things that are going to build our faith. We often say, God, I believe you. I believe in you. I have faith in you. Just don't make me prove it. Right? And that's very convicting, because a lot of times that's where all of us want to be. We want to live in this place of comfort. And we would rather fill our lives with trinkets and shiny things and shoes or clothing or food or whatever it is that you can think in your life of something that you might fill yourself with. And all that does is, the more that you accumulate, it's going to bring anxiety, because those things aren't going to do for you what you think that they will do for you. And that's the lie that Satan's going to try to make you believe. He wants to get you to a place that you're making just a good thing a God thing, and then you become frustrated or anxious. I believe it was Augustine who said that anxiety comes from the over love of good things. And so it's not wrong to love shoes or clothing or food to a certain extent, but it's the over love of those things that bring anxiety, because you're putting too much of your faith, too much of who you are, your identity in those things, and you're seeking for it to do what only God can do and fill and work through you. So we always look to situations and we say, I want my faith to be built through this. I want my faith to be something that's visible. But then when it starts to get a little bit too hard, you're like, I don't know that I want to go through all that. Don't make me prove that I have faith. I just want to talk about the faith that I have. So Drew Parker, he was another one who, like I mentioned a second ago, the hat. He's a country music singer. They did a pretty cool thing with him where they set him down with like a radio host, and they did like 5 questions where the radio host asked him 5 questions, and he just gave some very very good answers, things that he was probably just as impactful as some of the speakers, to be honest with you. But one thing that he said was, one big yes comes from many tiny yeses. One big yes comes from many little tiny yeses. And I think that, like, that's the whole, like, that's the following Jesus. It's when you say yes to a little thing, it's building your faith. It's allowing you to decipher God's voice, because as you're being obedient, his voice gets louder and louder in your life. So when you hear him calling you, and it is just every time he calls, it's, here am I, send me, despite what it looks like I have to go through to get there. I have in my mind the knowledge that the Son is always there. Right. And sometimes, as I'm saying son throughout this episode, we can put S-O-N, son, and not S-U-N. Right. The second thing that Drew Parker said, he said, and he talked a lot about discipleship. And he said, if that thing that you allow to speak into your life doesn't point you to Jesus, it's the wrong thing to be discipled by. And this is what we all need to recognize. This is what we all need to know in our lives, that we are all being discipled by something. Louis Giglio is doing a series of talks right now about the whole algorithm. And he says, we're all being discipled, and the algorithm wants to disciple you. It wants to show you what you like. That's why anytime you get on Netflix and you watch something, it gives you all these different suggestions of, hey, since you watched Breaking Bad, maybe you'll like this. Since you watched, we watched the Twilight movies. Kelly got me to watch the Twilight movies. Don't even get me started on that. But since you watched Twilight, maybe you'll want to watch this other fairy show. You know what I mean? So it's like, it gives you ideas of, hey, you're going to like this because you watch this. And a lot of times you're like, hey, maybe I will check this out. It's the same way with music. If you get on Apple Music like me and you listen to a song and you click create station, it's going to feed you a song maybe that you've never heard before, but it's similar to the one that you just listened to, right? It's discipling you whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not. That's why we have to be very careful. If the thing that you're allowing to speak into your life does not point you closer to Jesus, that is not the right thing to be discipled by. Whether it be friends, family, husband, wife, if that thing is not pushing you closer to Jesus, you need to pray, especially if it's a spouse. Like, let me say this too, to any of my unmarried friends out there. If that person is not pursuing Jesus, they're not for you. If that person is not trying to seek a relationship with Jesus that's going to be beneficial inside of a marriage, inside parenthood, that person is not for you. You need to flee from that person. Joby Martin said something the other day about too many of us are flirting instead of fleeing. Right? We flirt with something because we think, oh, this looks good. It's not going to hurt me. It's not going to harm me. I could just flirt with it when you need to flee. You need to get away from it. Don't pursue someone who's not going to point you closer to Jesus, whether it be a husband, wife, friend, colleague, whatever it is. Seek people that are going to push you closer to Jesus. And so I want to close with this. Galatians 6:9. We've read this verse time and time again. But it's never rang truer than right now because of some of the things that I explained earlier in this episode. How a lot of things have been going on in my life. I feel like there's been certain times I've been getting my teeth knocked in, and it's felt like kind of throwing in the towel at times a lot. And I hate to say that to you guys because I feel like I say that a lot to you guys. But I'm just being real. You know what I'm saying? Like this is the Christian walk. A righteous man falleth 7 times, but gets back up again. And so a lot of the ways that Satan's been attacking me lately has just been areas that he has been for a while now. You're not making any impact. The things that you're doing aren't helping anybody. It's not beneficial. You're not growing anywhere. You're not doing anything. Just all these boring, same old lies over and over and over again. And I feel like God spoke to me the other day with this verse, Joshua 24:15. Choose this day who you will serve. We need to stop worrying about tomorrow, next month, next week, next year, all of those things. Stop worrying about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Matthew 6, I believe it's tomorrow has enough trouble for itself. Something along those lines. Go fact check me. That's your homework for this week. Matthew chapter 6. But he says, don't worry about tomorrow. Seek first the kingdom, Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom and all these things will be added unto you. We're so fixated on the future that we neglect. Let me just do something today that's beneficial for the kingdom. Again, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year is an exaggerated version of who you are right now. So who you are going to become starts with where you are at today. So choose this day who you will serve. And so I feel that word is for somebody under the sound of my voice right now. Choose this day who you will serve. Do the next right thing right now, whatever that is. Choose the next right thing. Choose this day who you will serve, because that tiny yes today of Jesus, I'm going to serve you today. It's going to become easier tomorrow to, hey, I'm going to serve you today. Maybe you're someone who struggles with alcohol. Maybe you're someone who struggles with smoking. Maybe you're someone that struggles with pornography, and you just look at this overwhelming, what feels like a mountain coming at you, and you say, I can't overcome whatever this is. It reminds me of Hoosiers, where in the movie, if you've never seen it, it's about Gene Hackman, who goes in, he's coaching this high school basketball team, and he gets one of the kids' dads on the team is like at the town drunk. And he's like talking about how, he can't stop succumbing to the temptation of drinking, and he finally, breaks that habit for a little while, and he's sober, and he's assistant coaching with him, and then all of a sudden he's missing. They don't know where he is. He goes to his house, Gene Hackman, and he finds him, and he starts dunking his head underwater. You know what I mean? Like bringing him up, and he's like, "You got to cut it," and he's like, "I don't think I can cut it." Right? Because he's just feeling this overwhelming weight of this obstacle. It's way too big for me to overcome it. It's way too big. I can't give all of this up. Invite Jesus into whatever it is today. Stop worrying about tomorrow. Stop worrying about next week. Worry about right now. Choose this day who you will serve. Jesus, help me right now. Jesus, invade my space right now. Fill me right now. I'm not worried about tomorrow. Fill me now. I need you now. Choose this day who you will serve. Do not conform to this world, Romans 12, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind right now. Galatians 6:9, Paul says, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." So a lot of times when you're walking with Christ, patience is involved. Always when you're walking with Christ, patience is involved, and a lot of growth that happens in your life. You're not seeing it, but you need to look at the Christian life as like a tree, where as a tree is growing, you don't see a lot of growth right away, because a lot of growth that's taking place is underground. Never grow weary in doing good, for in due season you will reap if you do not give up. And then 1 Corinthians 15:10, I'm going to close on this. Paul says, "But by the grace of God I am what I am." I want you to listen to these words. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. I want you to think about this as we read through this verse. How many times Paul says grace? It's by grace. He starts a lot of his letters with grace and peace. The only thing that we're able to have, the only thing that we're able to attain in this life is because of the grace of God in our lives. Grace, God sending Jesus. Yeshua means salvation. John the Baptist, who paved the way, it says the voice of one crying in the wilderness. John means grace. So just this idea of grace coming before Yeshua, paving the way, grace paving the way for salvation. We would be completely at loss without the grace of God in our lives. And Paul recognizing that, but he's saying, hey, yes, it's because of God's grace, but there is a part for us to play as well. And even in our choosing to play our role in God's story, it's only because of God's grace we're able to do even that. So he says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. In fact, on the contrary, he says, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. I got that verse tattooed on my arm. By the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace towards me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, yet it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. And I want you to just think about that. Just kind of let that word wash over you. God is inviting you into the story, into his story, full of grace, full of truth. And yeah, maybe you're walking through, as David put it in Psalm 23:5, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. One commentary I read talked about how in Psalm 23, he says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. So he worded it in this commentary like this, where you have these angels of grace and mercy behind you, and you have the shepherd in front of you. You're completely protected. Satan does not want you to know that you are protected. Just because you are protected by the hand of God does not mean that God will not allow you to be tested. God tests, he never tempts. It says in James that God does not tempt anyone. He cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one, but he does test us. So maybe you're going through a testing right now. Maybe you're going through that storm right now, and you just need this word of truth to wash over you, that the sun is still there. Even though you can't see it, Foster taught us this week, hey, I can see the sun. I can see the sun. And so I wanted to share those two passages of Galatians 6:9 and 1 Corinthians 15:10, because I have been praying for years for something that God just opened up. And I was at work today, and we were driving back to the yard coming from Fort Payne, Alabama. And my pastor texted me, and he said, hey man, do you have a time for a quick call tonight or tomorrow to discuss you preaching one Sunday soon? And there's been a lot of things happening over the last couple years in terms of God building my faith. There's been a lot of things happening in terms of opening of doors that I've been praying for opportunities. And in 2024, I felt like God was telling me that I was going to get the opportunity to preach on a Sunday morning. And at that time, we were here at our, Stuart Heights, which was our old church. And now we're at a different church called Berean Baptist Church. And I felt like God told me in 2024 that I was going to get the opportunity to preach on a Sunday morning. I thought it was going to be here at Stuart Heights. So I started praying and asking him, if that was you, if this is what's going to happen, I pray that you would open that door. And 2 years, over 2 years has gone by, probably about 2.5 years now. And there was so many times that I remember asking God, I'm like, hey, is this ever going to happen? Can you, I felt like you told me this, but I don't see it. I don't know that's ever going to happen. And then you just think, just one day, just out of the blue, you just get a text. Hey, can we have the conversation about you preaching on a Sunday morning sometime soon? And I got pretty emotional. Just because God is so good. And so many times I've doubted the calling that I feel like God's placed on my life years ago. And then moments like these happen where, it's almost like God in heaven kind of smirking, saying, I told you it was going to happen, son. You know what I mean? And that to me was big, because it's like, I just started praying, thanking God, but then also sorry that I doubted you, and it's very humbling to think about some of the raw, real conversations that I've had with God, and being angry with God because in my mind things are taking too long, because doors aren't opening when I think they're supposed to open. And I'm going to butcher this, but Oswald Chambers talks about we have to get to a place in our walk, in our lives, where we're completely emptied of any ideas of what we think needs to happen. When you find yourself in that space, that's when God can really use you, because you don't have any expectations time-wise of, hey, this is supposed to happen when I say this is supposed to happen now. This should have already happened. When God already ordained things to happen in your life, like your voice, your talents, your abilities, the giftings and callings that God has given you are without repentance, it says in Romans 11. And they're already in rooms. They're already in places. And so it's a very humbling thought, to think how impatient I am so often with God, how frustrated I get at times. And yet I get a text, hey, let's talk about you preaching on a Sunday morning. And so I'm fired up. Especially over the last 6-8 months, I've really doubted that was ever going to happen. And now here we are. And so if you guys would, whoever's watching this to this point, I ask that you would pray for me. I'm going to be preaching over, I think it's Luke chapter 22, verses 31 through 34, which is where Jesus tells Peter he's going to deny him. God is good. So I just want to leave you with just that little encouragement. Like if you're going through a trial right now, if you're going through a storm and you're like, I don't know that I can get through it. I don't know if I can cut it. Blessed is the man that remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, James 1:12, he will receive the crown of life given to those who love God. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. So wherever you are right now, I don't know what you're going through. God does. I don't know what you're feeling right now. Maybe you feel like giving up. Blessed is the man. Blessed is the woman who remains steadfast. So wherever you are, whatever you're looking at, whatever obstacle, stand firm. Stand fast. The sun is still there.
You're a preacher, bro.